Welcome back to Bottom Line Africa on this 8th day of March. It is International Women's Day, and it is a day with the theme Balance for Better, seeking to empower women to do better, not just in the workplace, but in their social lives as well. Let's bring in our regional reporter, Trix Ngado, with more data surrounding the status of women in society. Trix, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. A whole day dedicated to women. How exciting is that? But as we celebrate the women in our lives, in our country, and also globally, there are a number of things that we need to focus on in terms of what ways do we have to improve situations for women, be it in politics, be it in terms of sexual violence, and other things that negatively impact or stand in the way of women living up to their absolute best potential. So we're going to take a look at some statistics that are going to show us what happens to women that makes them not to flourish as much as they could. Now, according to the Global Gender Gap Report of 2018, 32% is the global average gap yet to be closed. So we have some way to go, and in fact, in some countries it is worse than the other. So there's a lot of work to be done in various aspects. For example, in the political area of many countries, there's less representation for women as compared to men. So women suffer because they are not having leaders in positions that can influence changes in government and policy that improve their lives and or cater to their needs, and that trickles down to the needs of their children and the people they're actually entrusted to taking care of. So let's move on to the next slide and see how the numbers look like on that front. Now, 77.1% global gap. There's a 77.1% global gap in political empowerment, and this is globally, not just in Africa or in Kenya. This is globally. So there's a lot to be done in that area, and also globally, only 17 out of the 195 countries have female presidents. That's a lot. That's a huge gap. Then we are having 18% of ministers are female in the whole wide world. We're not just talking about Kenya. Remember, just the whole wide world, only 18 countries, percent of all the countries have women as their ministers. And also we have some more statistics right there. One we have in terms of economic empowerment. This is huge because women are usually entrusted with taking care of their families, taking care of societies by default. And so it would make sense that they would be empowered economically. But when you look at the numbers, women actually also suffering in this area. So access to finances, only 60% of the world's countries have equal access to finances for men and women. So we're having a 40% of the world's countries not having any gains in this area. Then we have 42% of the countries in the whole wide world having women unable, in the whole wide world having women with access to land. This is a very thorny issue, particularly in African nations, whereby it is believed that women cannot, in some countries we have traditions where it is believed women cannot actually inherit land. So they're actually by default disadvantaged. And it is interesting because a lot of statistics indicate that women are more into agriculture, and they actually, as it says here, these samples indicate the women spend twice as much time on unpaid activities compared to men. So you're taking a look at farming, and this is subsistence farming just to help the families. And you know, if they cannot access this land and yet they're the ones working on the land, there's a bit of disparity there, and there's a lot of work to be done in improving those statistics for the good of our women and our society. Now, less than 2%, this is the Kenyan statistic, less than 2% of title deeds issued in Kenya since 2013 went to women. Now, we can imagine our society as it is, just 2% of women were able to earn title deeds and claim land on this in this country. And the World Bank estimates that women run more than 3/4 of Kenyans' farms. So 3/4 of Kenyans' farms are run by women, but we are having 2% of women having access to land ownership since 2013. And this is because maybe they do not have the finances, they're not empowered, they do not know they can, or they belong to societies that believe it is the boy child that can inherit land rather than the girl child. So that is the disadvantage we are facing right here in this country of Kenya. Let's move on to the next slide and see what more statistics we have on that issue of women and the gap between men and women. So we're having Kenyan Land Alliance giving us statistics that indicate that 103 43 title deeds. That's 10% of title deeds were issued to women, as opposed to 865,095 title deeds, 86.5% that went to men. That's a giant gap. It is actually unacceptable. In hectares, that is actually the measurement for the size of land. We're having 10,129,704 hectares, and out of this, women can only boast to owning 163,253 hectares of land. The rest goes to men, and this is because of those difficulties that I mentioned earlier in terms of them being able to own land or actually lay claim to land that they should actually naturally inherit. Let's move on and see some more statistics on women and the situation in terms of violence against women. This is an issue that has been spoken for since the beginning of time, and we're having different forms of violence, including sexual violence by family members and spouses, as well as people who are not related to women. Now, statistics from the United Nations show that adult women account for 51% of all human trafficking victims. Now, these victims are trafficked, of course, and find themselves in brothels in abroad or other foreign nations, and they're actually slaves. They are forced to work without pay because somebody kidnapped them, or somehow they found their way in the hands of the wrong people, and they have to suffer sometimes to their death or for the rest of their lives. And then we are having 87,000 women were intentionally killed in the year 2017, and another of these part of these 87,000 of those 50,000 were killed by partners and family members. So the enemy is not just without, it's sometimes somebody close to that woman. And then we're looking at violence against women. Still, lifetime physical and sexual violence is at a 39% prevalence. We're having physical and sexual intimate partners and violence in the last perpetrators of that violence. In the last 12 months, they were at a 26% prevalence. And then official national statistics are not available on the number of women that suffer physical or sexual violence by people who are not related to them or close family members. Now, moving on, we're having child marriage also affecting women and a lot of young girls who are forced to drop out of school, and they have to they cater for they are at a prevalence of 23%. And then gender inequality index is at 135, while the global gender gap index ranks at 63% as at now. That is the prevalence rate. Now, let's take a look at the gains. It's not all sad. There's some positives. For example, the full parity was achieved in certain countries. For example, the Bahamas, Colombia, Jamaica, Laos, and the Philippines. While things may not be perfect, but in this country, it is said that they have actually achieved full gender parity, which is the goal for most countries that are working towards this. And then we're having 19 countries having 40% of women in managerial positions. There are countries actually in Africa that are said to have really good representation in politics. For example, Rwanda is doing very well with the representation in the political arena. That's it on women and gender parity. Let's get back to you, Michelle, for more.
Many thanks. That is our regional reporter, Trixie Gado, there giving us the statistics surrounding women, not just in Kenya, but in the continent as well. Remember, the Sustainable Development Goals envision gender equality as well as empowerment of all women and girls by the year 2030. But how possible is that? Well, in studio for more on that conversation, Betty Adera, Chief of Party